Hello and welcome to episode 54 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Brandon Guerra, a formidable jazz drummer and multi-instrumentalist who is no stranger to the Central Texas jazz scene. Brandon studied under revered jazz musicians such as Butch Miles, Ari Hoenig, and Wayne Salzmann II, and is a proud endorsing artist for Vic Firth drumsticks and Canopus drums. In this episode, we dive into the malleable writing process for contemporary dance companies. We also talk about the vast musical possibilities with modern instruments, and a boozy cordless trio gig with the never-ending thought, what are we doing right now? Moving on to the release of the week, this one comes from Stephen Feifke. It is called Stardust, and it's the third single on the next release from the Stephen Feifke Big Band featuring Martina da Silva. It's comprised of previously released arrangements on YouTube through the years and highlights the origins of the Stephen Feifke Big Band, coming hot on the heels of his debut big band record, Kinetic, and it will be released exclusively on streaming platforms through a partnership with a new household name, La Reserve, which is an independent label in Brooklyn that features some of the most killing artists on the New York scene. If you want to go and support Stephen's music directly, you can go over to stephenfeifkemusic.com, and for all things with La Reserve, you can go over to lareserve.bandcamp.com. And if you want to check out all things Stephen and all things Martina all the time, you can go over to their Instagram handles, which is @StephenFeifke and @MartyDoss. Moving on to the Monk shows of the week, the first one that we want to plug is on Thursday, August the 19th, which is the Greg Clifford Quartet. Then a few days later on Sunday, August 22nd, you'll have the Sam Pankey Trio. And then finally, the Wayne Salzmann's Groove Society will be on Tuesday, August the 24th. Tickets are available for the limited in-person audience at monksjazzclub.com. And as always, every show will be live streamed with links to donate in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That is it for all of the plugs this week. Go check out Stephen Feifke's new single, which is called Stardust, and all of the Monk shows this week. But for now, let's dive into episode 54, Brandon Guerra. This is Off the Bandstand.
I did 2 years as an engineering major.
Okay, cool.
Industrial engineering, and I minored in math, and I was like doing that, and then I switched to music and started studying with Butch. And
that's funny because whenever you said engineering, I thought you were going to say like sound engineering.
Recording? No. I was systems engineering, like an actual engineering job.
So where did that come from? Why was that kind of the initial route?
Well, I was like in GT classes in high school and stuff, and my advisors and even my parents were like, you should really, do something that'll pay off, and
Sure.
You can always play music. I know all these doctors that have bands on the weekends.
Yeah, right.
And I kind of gave into that, and was like, I'm going to make money and be an engineer and do that. Yeah. And I did 2 years of it, and it was just not fun. You know? It was pretty terrible.
Where'd you come up?
San Antonio.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, grew up in San Antonio, went to Texas State, and then switched to music.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I graduated, I was like, do I move to San Antonio because I was playing a lot with Brent down there before Jazz Texas was open, or do I move to Austin because there's more people my age and there's just like a really vibrant scene.
Sure.
So I moved to Austin, and I lived with Colin and, and Sam Pankey. I lived in Austin for a couple years.
That's a musical household.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then I moved back to San Antonio when Jazz Texas opened.
Okay.
Kind of moved back for that gig.
Got it. Okay, so I guess once you switched your degree and you were at Texas State, is that when you got associated with Brent?
Yeah, I started studying with Butch.
Okay.
And it was awesome. And Butch actually got me connected with Brent. I first met Brent subbing for Butch because Butch would go down and play at this steakhouse with Brent, every couple months. And there was one weekend, and he was like, I can't do it, but I'm going to send my student instead.
Okay.
And he sent me down, and I played, and then I played the next weekend, and then the next weekend, and I just kept playing with him after that.
That's funny. That's, you almost got to think that, Butch, aside from his illustrious career, is like, what gives, man? Like, I sent my student, and now he's getting all the calls.
Snaked my gig. Yeah, he really helped me a lot. it was like the last year or two that I was at Texas State, because I was coming up to Austin, playing at the jam session at the Elephant Room, and I think he was telling people that played with him, like John Frimgen and stuff, to keep an eye out for me. And
Sure. What was the split like whenever you were doing your degree at Texas State, and how much were you gigging during your degree, and what was the split like between Austin and San Antonio during that time? Because you're kind of right in the middle. I mean, that was the nice thing of San Marcos.
It got really interesting my last year in school, but it was really nice because I had taken 90% of my classes, so I had a really light schedule, and I started playing a lot of gigs.
Okay.
So it was great. And then once I graduated, I just kept playing gigs.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do that since then until last year.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it was a lot of driving on 35. I was on 35 like every day.
Yeah.
Either going to Austin or to San Antonio. Even if I didn't have a gig, I'd usually end up coming to Austin to go listen to people play.
Yeah, right. In those drives, like, because I would also do that, it was like the I-35 corridor, baby.
Yeah.
It's just like back and forth,
Every day.
I found that facilitated a lot for me, listening to some very, very specific people, whether it was podcasts or musicians. Was there anything that was like, oh, this allowed me to really dive into X musician, or was it always just kind of like, whatever I'm feeling that day?
Well, no, it was awesome because I was really late getting into jazz, because I was doing like DCI and marching band and drum corps and stuff like that. I was really into that. So I was like marching Phantom Regiment and Santa Clara Vanguard and doing that. And then I aged out of drum corps and I started learning jazz when I was 21.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of catch up to do in terms of listening, because I had never really checked anything out. And I was like trying to learn form and playing with brushes and soloing, but also learning who Max Roach was and Elvin Jones and Art Blakey. So all the driving was like prime time to just constantly be listening to music and checking stuff out. But I didn't have Spotify or Apple Music.
Yeah.
So I was just buying jazz stuff on iTunes, $9.99 an album, and just spending all my money on like jazz.
Some might say that's the way to do it. Even still,
right.
I mean, I think we sub out now the large corporation of Apple, and I say with an Apple Watch on, we sub out the large corporation of Apple, and we say Bandcamp, right? Because those like First Fridays or whatever it is, like all the proceeds go to the musicians. But okay, cool. So out of curiosity, what Phantom and Santa Clara shows were you? Because I was in marching band in high school, a trumpet player.
Oh, cool.
So that was like I would go to like San Antonio for the whatever big things. What shows were you in?
So I played snare drum in 2010 Phantom, which was Into the Light.
Okay.
And that was a really cool year. We won the Fred Sanford Award for the best percussion. It was a crazy, crazy good drum line. And then the following year, I was at Santa Clara Vanguard, which was 2011.
Okay.
So our teacher was this guy, Paul Rennick, who teaches at University of North Texas. And he had been at Phantom forever. And then he moved to Santa Clara Vanguard. So all of the Phantom Regiment drum just went and marched at SCV.
I was going to ask if that's like a thing where it's like frowned upon to switch between, or if it's all just kind of a melting pot.
It was hard for the people who were already in SCV and had been there for years playing snare drum or quads, and then they get a new percussion instructor and they get cut, because all these guys come in from Phantom. And so that I felt bad for those guys that was kind of the thing. But it's, it was pretty clear none of us had any like allegiance to a specific drum corps. It was more to the instructor. And
well, I mean, you hear of people doing that with universities, right?
You find the teacher that you want to be with, and you go to wherever they are, even if it's like a community college, go learn from them.
What was that like? I mean, how much had you already started diving into jazz before you started working with Butch? Because I have to assume it might be easier to start with Butch if you didn't know all of the accolades that he has, because like if you did know, and that might be the case, I'll let you answer, I would be so intimidated just to be like, whoa, this is literally like one of the last remaining of like the like super golden age of all these like super iconic people that we now hold to be the revered, running list of jazz musicians. So were you aware of how...
I wasn't at first.
Okay.
I knew he was a big deal and that he taught at the university, but I wasn't like a jazz head, and I didn't really know. And people were like, well, he played with Basie. And I was like, I didn't really know, I was like, oh, okay. But then I remember my first lesson with Butch. It was like an hour before my first lesson with him. And somebody was like, hey, check out this picture that Butch posted on his Facebook. And it was Butch Miles and John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, Zeppelin's drummer. And it's like the two of them like hanging out, in the 1970s or something. And I was like pretty big into Led Zeppelin before I was into jazz. I was like, oh shit. And then I went to my lesson and was just sitting next to him like, oh my God. And then I started doing the deep dive and it's Willie Nelson and, Basie and Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald. And I mean, everybody. Butch played with everyone. So yeah, I definitely was like starstruck walking in there the first day,
I had this one memory of like, I think I must have been like a second semester freshman, and I knew I wanted to talk to him, but I was so scared, and I was like, I had no idea what I would ask him about. And I'm sure I asked a typical, what was it like working with Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra or whatever. But I remember him just, and I knew at the time this question is probably not up to snuff. It's not a very specific question, but he was so gracious. And like, at least in my experience with Butch, and I think most people would probably like agree, like he didn't have any ego about him. It was all just the most gracious, like, oh yeah, let me tell you, and like super animated on his face, just like, I mean, just puts you completely at ease, talk about like that thing we were talking about off camera of like running into celebrities and being super intimidated. I mean, none of that seems present with him at all.
No way. And he's hung with all of them, He's hung out with the Rolling Stones. I mean, and that's just how he is. And it's funny, being a jazz drummer, it's like, kind of like when I was doing DCI, people would ask me, have you seen the movie Drumline? And everyone's like, it's not like really how it is.
Right.
But once I got into jazz, everyone was like, have you seen the movie Whiplash? Yeah. Because that must have been what it was like for you. You had a teacher that was like slapping you in the face and like you were bleeding because you played so hard. And I was like, man, I studied with a guy who was like is a living legend.
Yeah.
And he never raised his voice.
Yeah.
Never got upset with me for anything. He was a total sweetheart of a person and just more than willing to share everything that he could. And so it was nothing like the movie Whiplash.
Right. I was very conflicted about that because I love J.K. Simmons and I really like Miles Teller as well. So I remember whenever I saw the movie, I loved the movie, but I was like, this doesn't feel right. And I was like, I must have been 18 or 19 like when it came out. So like, and I wasn't an official jazz major, but I was like, this doesn't feel like the vibe. But I did love the movie just from like a production standpoint.
It's a well done movie. But like that teaching style was more in line with what I experienced in DCI.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's like military, and my first day at Phantom Regiment, we were like getting screamed at by like the brass instructors and marching around, and it was very much like you're doing this thing, you know.
Yeah, right.
But with jazz, man, it was like, what I felt was missing on Whiplash was the part where you love the music. You know, it's all about like, you got to play and you have to be excellent, and but there's never like the part where they just sit around like listening to records, smiling and like, man, wasn't that hip? You know, rewind that. Like, ooh, yeah, like
everybody's just miserable.
Yeah,
for 90
everyone's
minutes,
just like hating it. Yeah. Whereas definitely with Butch, he helped me like fall in love with jazz and was like, this is what you need to listen for.
Yeah.
Check out this record. You know, let me tell you a story about this guy. And
you know, I think a lot of people also would be very interested, like, and I am interested to know about. So you said that through Butch, you got that gig with Doc, and then you guys started playing. How long were you playing together before he had opened Jazz Texas?
Yeah, I started playing with Doc in like 2013.
Okay.
I think. And I was 23 at the time, and I'd only been playing jazz for like a year and a half. So I was really green and didn't have any experience playing gigs outside of school. Yeah. I just played like in the combo room at Texas State and recitals and stuff like that.
That lovely combo room.
The small, the tablet of 2/5s on the chalkboard.
I forgot about that. Yeah,
it's like a rock with like Sharpie on it or something.
We're gonna like just flash that picture up in the corner of the screen.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah.
So we played Doc. I call him Brent. Everyone calls him Doc.
Yeah, right.
But he had this steady gig at a steakhouse in San Antonio called Bohannon's.
Yeah, right.
And he had been playing there for a number of years with kind of some rotating, guys. And so I met him there on a Friday night at Bohannon's.
Okay.
And he had only booked me for Friday night. And then at the end of that night, he was like, you know, do you want to play tomorrow night? Which was Saturday. And I was like, hell yeah. And then at the end of Saturday night, he was like, do you want to play next Friday and Saturday? And I was like, hell yeah.
Right,
you know?
Right.
And so we started playing a lot. And that was before the club was open. So he was almost had like a booking agency at the time. So we were doing a lot of private parties and weddings and corporate gigs and the regular steakhouse thing every weekend. We had a Sunday afternoon gig where I just played a snare drum and a hi-hat with brushes. You know, it was 3 hours every Sunday with just brushes,
very limited,
which was amazing because I was still like learning how to play with brushes.
Yeah, right.
And you know, I would like be in lessons with Butch on brush stuff, and he was like, "Well, you just have to do it," you know. And then I had the opportunity to do it every week, which
well, I have to imagine that was like invaluable, like just that experience to kind of light a fire under and be like, this is the gig. Like, it's not like just like a thing like, oh yeah, practice this because you might have to use it. It's like, no, this is the gig. This is what you have to do every week.
This is the gig. And he was like, this is all you can bring. I don't want you to bring a bass drum, and I don't want you to bring a cymbal. Like just bring a snare drum and a hi-hat. And the reason was he had another drummer that he played with, this guy Graham Francis, who lives in New York now. And apparently Graham like forgot a lot of his drum kit for a gig that they had. And he showed up and he was like, oh man, I left my kick drum and my toms and my...
Oh no.
He left everything at home. But he was like, well, I got a snare drum and a hi-hat. It'll be fine. And so he brought that and played, and everyone loved it. And they were like, oh, you don't need anything else. So for this Sunday afternoon gig, Brent was like, you're only going to bring a snare drum and a hi-hat because you don't need anything else. I was like, well, I kind of do need some more stuff. But yeah, I think through the limitation of only having those two things and playing 3 hours of music, you got to get creative about, you know, playing some time on the hi-hat or playing just the snare drum without the hi-hat for the melody, for the first chorus of the solo. And then you add that hi-hat and it's like, oh, it's a big deal. Whereas when you have everything, you can just play everything all the time.
Right.
And it can be a little overwhelming, you know. But yeah, so playing with Brent, we were playing a lot. 2 or 3 years, and then Jazz Texas opened in 2016. Coming up on the 5th anniversary.
Man, congratulations.
Next Monday, August 23rd, 2016 is when it opened.
Wow.
And he had kind of stepped away from the steakhouse gig and all the private parties and stuff. So I really wasn't, I didn't see him very much. 6 months, 8 months, almost a year before the club was opening.
Interesting,
Because he was meeting with so many people. It was the new construction. They were like building the actual building, and it was just clear that he was like going in this like very different direction as a business owner and as a club owner. Still a musician. And then once it was open, it was like, oh, now we're playing again. Now we're like back to seeing each other and playing gigs, but it was just there instead of the other places.
Was there any like hesitation in your mind thinking like, obviously not hesitation because that implies some sort of like entitlement. That's definitely not what I'm getting at. But was there any like kind of hopefulness of like, oh, maybe I'll get called to do the house drumming gig like once he opens this thing up? Like was it a surprise when he called you for it?
No, he had made it pretty clear. And he had over the years. He's always been super cool with me and very upfront. Even when I first started playing with him, he was like, "I want you to be the guy that's playing all of my gigs, in and around San Antonio." And I was like, "Wow, thanks."
I appreciate it.
Awesome. And so as Jazz Texas was opening, and I lived in Austin, and he knew that I really loved living in Austin and playing, because I would still sub gigs with him to come play in Austin because it was really important, for me personally to still be connected with a lot of the musicians that I had met and been working with in Austin. And that was something that Butch had taught me, which was like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Play with as many people as you can, as many styles, as many tempos, as many originals, standards, like just as much as you can. And so that's why I moved to Austin. After school, and I was still kind of juggling, like going back and forth, playing with Brent, playing with guys in Austin. But then as the club was opening, he put it pretty clearly and was like, look, we're going to be playing here a lot, and you're going to be commuting a lot from Austin if you want to do this gig. He's like, I'm not telling you what to do, but but maybe you should consider like kind of moving back here because it's going to be a lot of work. And that, it was a smart decision. San Antonio's been really good to us, to my wife and I.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, like, were you married at the time when you took the gig?
I wasn't. I think I was engaged at the time. Okay. And yeah, you know, it's just like the cost of staying in Austin was just going up.
Right.
And, you know, gigs in general pay a certain amount. And I really was adamant that I like didn't want a day job. And I didn't want to like work during the day and then play my gigs at night. I really wanted to just like be a musician through and through. So yeah, it was kind of a no-brainer when he offered me the gig. It was like, man, you know, we can live real close. We can live in a really affordable place.
Yeah, right.
And it's good, consistent work every week, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I know too that your wife is a professional dancer, right?
Yes.
So how was that also like getting that decision? Because I know that obviously like big metropolitan areas have, you know, I would think, I mean, my mother's a choreographer and a dancer, and I mean, just based on what she's told me, I would think that big metropolitan areas have big dance companies that provide or either a different array of different opportunities for dance type companies and such. So how did that affect the decision-making process with her and her work as well?
It was tough at first because you would think that any large city has some, you know, form of like a dance scene. And so my wife Felicia was a ballet dancer growing up, but then she got really into contemporary. Okay. And she was with a really well-known company out of Chicago called Hubbard Street. Okay. And so she had been like dancing professionally, and you know, she has a lot of friends in Austin that were like doing projects and stuff. But in San Antonio, there's not much of a like contemporary dance scene. Got it. Okay. There's Ballet San Antonio. There's a lot of like ballet for children and stuff like that. So like there is dance, but it's not like being in Austin or being in New York or Europe where there's you can go see like high quality contemporary dance and theaters and stuff. So it was challenging, definitely, because at the time she was doing a lot of dance here in Austin, and she was like, well, I'm sacrificing coming to San Antonio, you know. But as time has gone on, she's actually transitioned and is doing a lot of like personal training. Okay. She teaches Pilates and is like fitness and all that stuff. And it's been really, really great for her. She has a bunch of clients that she sees multiple times a week, and they all love her, and she feels very you know, happy to be doing that. And she'll still do dance gigs, but they're like not in San Antonio, you know. She'll go to Kansas City for a month at a time and dance with a company out there and you know, stuff like that. So. Yeah, if it's not too personal, just because I kind of deal with this myself too, is, you know, there's not like a whole lot of travel involved for either of us, but Lydia and I have been together for, I mean, in December it's going to be 6 years, which is crazy to think about. How long have you been with your wife? We got together in 2015. So okay. Yeah, 6 years. Very cool. Yeah, nice. But yeah, like there will be some times where either she's like, oh, I have to, you know, go here for a week, or I have to do this, you know, whether it's work related or just to see your family. And you know, if I wasn't busy, then I'd be like, oh no, like, you know, like I'm, you know, not like clingy, but I am very sentimental. But then if things are super busy with work, it's almost kind of nice because it's like this kind of designated time of like, okay, now I can just like super dial in. And once you get back, it's like, okay, now fully spend the time together in that way. So do you find that can sometimes be a healthy balance, especially in marriage, where it's kind of like, all right, we're together, but if you need to go and do this, we're able to fully focus on our careers for a second and then come back to center? Or is it hard, like to balance those two arts in a marriage? Yeah, it can be hard. You know, I think we're fortunate that that we're not both musicians. Okay, yeah. I don't know, but that's just my guess. Is that there's not like a direct competition of our careers like that, where she's like, hey, I got this gig, and I'm like, oh, I don't have a gig this week, and oh, so and so called me. Like it's not like that, which I think is kind of nice for us. Yeah, right. But yeah, when she goes out of town, that's when I'm like, okay, well now I should get real serious and practice a lot, or now I'll finish this project or whatever. Right, yeah. And then once we're back together, it's always good. But it's hard because we have dogs now. We have 2 dogs, and it makes me realize how much she helps take care of them, how much she does just take care of them all the time. Because she'll go out of town, and then I'm in charge of the dogs, and I'm playing gigs, and I'm like, oh, this is tough. You know, I'm gone for a long time, and like, you know, we make it work, you know, but it definitely is better when we're all in the same household. Lydia really, really wants a dog. We live
up north, and we live literally like right outside of our apartment door is a dog park. And she's always just like, please, 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 can we get a dog? And I'm like, we could definitely have a dog during the pandemic because we have all this time. But I was like, once things
get back
pick
to work
up, you know, because I know me too. Like I grew up with like 8 dogs in the house, you know, like a lot of dogs. So I was like, I know that I will see those puppy dog eyes and just like neglect my responsibilities. So it's like, no, we have to wait until things are a little bit more like consistent, whatever that might look like or whatever. But yeah, that's really interesting. Also, you know, I was texting you last night and saying that I was checking out the Arcos stuff and what was it called? Into the Ether. And I saw that you had played on that. And I'm not sure if you also wrote stuff like that, but I know that you write for kind of an array of different dance companies. And I think that's really fascinating. I would love to talk to you about that, about the idea of stepping into another medium and trying to find a way to, you know, kind of as you were saying, having the discernment of when to use just brushes, when to use hi-hat, and to accommodate either the solos or the head or all these different things. And we were talking about using synths earlier and you know, how it works over spoken word but doesn't like, you know, overstep any territory. So what is that like for you? You know, how different is it in your regular writing process than when you're writing for dancers and dance companies?
It's cool. It's cool because when I love it, and it's been new, and it's something that's like totally different, which has been awesome. When I'm writing stuff for myself, like I'm working on an album right now with a friend, and we're writing a lot of original stuff, and that's fun, and it's a certain type of creativity. But you're still somewhat in the box of like, I'm making an album, right? And it's going to be my album. And so what am I going to do? And what songs am I going to have? And there's so many things that go into that. But with dance, what I found, especially like contemporary dance, which I guess not everyone like knows what that is. It's pretty loose, right? So in my mind, it's like people just get together and like do whatever. But it's not. It's like these are all dancers that are like trained in ballet, so they have like really good like dancing technique. But then what they're presenting is not ballet. It can be any kind of contemporary movement, you know. So those types of dancers are the dancers that I was working with a lot. Here in Austin, I worked with Arcos and then this other dance company called Blip Switch. I did a piece of music for them. It was about 30 minutes of music. I've worked with this dancer, a friend of Felicia's who's in Canada, and it's all contemporary dance. And what I have found is they are the most open type of artists in regard to music, because it, like anything goes. In a really good way, you know. And it was challenging for me at first because I thought, as a musician, as a drummer, I'm like, the dance has to be with the music. If you're gonna do a movement, I'm gonna play something that goes with that, you know. And the more musical the dance is, the better. But that's not always the case. It's usually the case, you know. A lot of times dancers will choreograph and rehearse to different music than they perform.
Which is, that's so interesting to me because like I feel like, well, I mean, it's a lot like whenever you hear a tune or like a standard for the first time, you're going to cement that with who you first listened to, right? So like, that's crazy to me that they might rehearse an entire thing that might be, you know, however loosely or specifically choreographed, that is something entirely different from what it ends up being.
It's so crazy. And that was hard for me to learn because I was like, well, what are you doing rehearsing to something that you're not gonna, you know, like as a musician, it's very much like black and white. But for them, it's like, well, whatever. This provides a certain mood, and your music will provide a different mood. But this movement will exist in either of those spaces, you know. And that was really cool for me to learn and to let go that it doesn't have to be as synchronized as I think it might need to be or should be, you know. And it's really freeing. From a composing standpoint, because you can really explore all kinds of different stuff, you know, and a lot of that contemporary dance music is not set to a form. It's not set to a tempo. It's not like you play 32 bars of this and then there's a 8 measure break and then, you know, it's not like that. It's like you might just play a drone in F for 8 minutes with different textures coming in and coming out, and field recordings of, trains, and you slow them way down and put a filter on it. And, it's just a completely different process of making music.
Yeah. That's also very intimidating because it's easier to write something, whether it's like actually like writing, like it's like a school paper or something like that, when you have parameters. But having such an open landscape and open template is like, I assume that's got to be really intimidating too.
Yeah, it can be daunting,
Yeah.
and that's why eventually you just have to go with an idea and trust it. And trust that the dancers will probably like it.
Yeah.
In my own experience, it's been very rare that I'm like, here's something I made, and they're just like, oh man, they're usually like, yeah, it's amazing.
Right.
Which is really, there's a lot of like affirmation, that it's like, okay, this can work.
Is that generally all pre-recorded, or do you do live, like perform any of the music live with them?
I've done both.
Okay.
Yeah, for some people, it's just been stuff that I make at home in my studio, and I send it to them, and I can make revisions and send it back. And then with other groups, I have done live performances with drums or synthesizers and stuff like that. With Arcos Dance, which is based out of here in Austin, it's run by two people, Erica Gianfrido and Elliot Fisher. And they're an awesome like power couple. And Elliot is a musician. And so Elliot and I would get together, and we worked on a show of theirs. It was called Domain, which was like an hour or an hour and a half. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. And for that show, it was in a theater. It was at Texas State in the new recital hall.
In the actual
the Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, was it the one that the musical theater uses, like the big hall, or was it the music recital hall?
No, now I can't remember. It's been a number of years.
Okay,
but it was that new facility.
Yeah, right.
And for that one, I was on stage the whole time.
Whoa.
And they were dancing, and they had set changes and costume changes and all this stuff. And I was like on stage with my OP1, and that was the only thing I had. And I was turning knobs and playing live, but a lot of the music had also been pre-recorded, and I was playing on top of it.
Okay,
adding some stuff, improvising some stuff live.
That's really cool.
On top, yeah, it's just so different, such a different world.
Yeah.
Than like the jazz world.
That's also interesting because it's like you're the architect, but you get to choose how much you're going to do before and how much you're going to do later, right? So like, how do you balance that of like, because I would think, okay, if I'm going to be doing something live, I want to make something that is very sparse, very like open, so it allows for maximum, improvisation, creativity. But do you like to have the pre-recorded thing in that specific scenario or anything that's like it more involved and then do more stuff over on top of it?
Yeah, I think it depends. But for that specific show, Elliot and I had written a majority of the music was done and was like tracks that they were dancing to, and then that just gave me space with the OP1 to pepper in some stuff on top. And I could be pretty sparse with it and still feel like I was adding to the thing and enhancing the thing. And it let me tap into the jazz and improvisation side of my music. So I was able to like be in the moment and like watch what's happening and like play stuff and go with that without it just being a total blank canvas and building it from scratch. Yeah. Because that can be hard to do for an extended period of time depending on your setup, because you're limited by what you have right in front of you in that moment, whether it's a synth or a piano or a drum set or there was this clinic that I saw in Los Angeles at Ableton Loop. So Ableton is like a music software,
right,
and they put on this convention every year, and it was all these like DJs and producers, and I was kind of underwhelmed by most of it. It's like dudes like turning knobs and stuff. But I saw this guy Michael Wall, who is on the dance faculty at a university in Utah, but he's a musician. He's a jazz musician.
Interesting. Okay.
But he's not in the music school. He's in the dance school. He's a dance professor, and he does music for dance. And he did this like hour-long clinic, and he brought two of his students, these dancers, with him, and they did a 5-minute duet that they had choreographed. And it was the perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, because they did the same duet 3 or 4 times, same movement, totally same. And he improvised a dance score for them in real time. And he had like an Ableton push, a microphone, a looping rig, a trumpet, a little music box. And then on Ableton, he has this massive template of instruments and sounds that he can pull from. And so he would literally ask the room, he's like, somebody give me a key. Like, F, okay, major or minor? Minor. Okay, pick an odd number for the meter, 11, okay. Pick a tempo, beats per minute, 72. It's like, okay. And he's like, all right, we're gonna go 72 beats per minute in 11/8 time with nothing pre-recorded, here we go. And then the dancers would start, and he would start, and it was like so heavy, unbelievably heavy. I was like deeply moved, and they would finish, he'd talk about it, what did you see, what did you feel, what did you like? Okay, let's do it again, somebody pick another key. So, and then it would be a completely different thing. And I was so floored by this guy. And then just to find out that he's like not even teaching music at the university, he's like on the dance faculty. So that was really, inspiring for me, because I had already been doing some of this dance stuff, and then I saw that guy, and I was like, oh, this is another level.
Yeah, right. Wow, that's incredible. How much do you, talking about, how he was, is a very intimate setup, having just two people and then the one.
And a little table of stuff.
Right, and in that scenario, it's not like, okay, here's the director, and and I would, if I started to list the production crew of a dance company, I would be very out of my depth. So I'll just say choreographer, and I'll leave it at that, and let the people who are more knowledgeable take it from there. But how much do you like to talk to the director, and also how much do you like to talk to like the dancers themselves whenever you're making that music?
Yeah, it varies project to project. Like there's some projects where like I'm only talking to like the director, or sometimes the director is a dancer in the show, because they're like smaller companies where people who are actually performing are also running the company too.
Sure.
But then like with Arcos, I was pretty removed from a lot of the dance stuff. I would like hang and talk with the dancers, but not really about the creative process. It was more just me and this guy Elliot. But just it kind of varies. But a lot of times I've just found that I have a lot of freedom to just do whatever I want to do, which is great. That it's not like, you got to do it this way. It's got to be like this. And if it's not like this, it's not going to be cool.
Right. So, obviously we've been talking a lot about these like synths and like the palette of sounds that you've been able to create. And I saw that you're like working on two projects that you briefly mentioned earlier. But so you're working on like an ambient electronica EP, and you're also working on like I just want to make sure I say it right, like a lo-fi hip-hop beat track.
Beat tape.
Beat tape, thank you. I'm out of my depth. But yeah, so tell me about like what the impetus for going to each one of these projects was, and how you've like arrived at each one separately. Yeah.
There's another project too that I haven't like really posted about or anything, but I'm working on this other album with a friend. And that's all inspired by the freeze that we all experienced back in February.
Interesting.
And we're going to release that probably on the anniversary of the freeze date, which is like Valentine's Day.
Okay.
So we're working on that one as well. And that takes those same genres that we were just talking about, which is like lo-fi hip-hop, instrumental hip-hop and stuff like that, like Jay Dilla inspired lo-fi grooves, and also some like really loose, open, ambient soundscapes and stuff like that. So I'm working on some of that stuff for myself to release under my own thing, and then I'm also working on that, with the friend. We're kind of collaborating.
Right.
But I was just playing a lot of jazz, living in Austin and going down to San Antonio, and like there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's like why we're here. But what I learned was, or what I was experiencing, was that I was playing with some of these musicians who were just like incredible musicians, and we'd finish a gig and everybody would be like, oh, I suck, or like, oh man, it's just, terrible. And I would be like, what you guys are like amazing. You're like some of the best musicians anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of a mentality that I've seen with a lot of jazz players, where it's like the standard is so high to be so excellent all the time that it can be hard to like what you play.
Exactly.
And you finish a gig and it's like, oh, I didn't play anything of value.
Yeah.
Which is never the case.
Right.
But it's easy to feel that way.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like getting me down, that I was like, man, I'm playing these like awesome gigs, but then I'm like, is it me? Do I suck? And because these guys are great, you know, but they're like, we finished the gig and they didn't have fun. It's like, maybe I'm the weak link, or I'm not swinging hard enough, or it was just like a weird headspace that I was starting to get in. And so I was living in Austin with Colin, and I was in my bedroom. There was like 4 people that lived at this house, and the living room was a jam space. And I knew that I wanted to like start getting into electronic stuff and trying to like combine electronic music with jazz and that kind of stuff. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't even know how to like operate a PA system properly. Yeah, sure. And then I heard what I thought was like a synth wave, like electronic band rehearsing in our living room. It's like arpeggiators, pads, you know, rhythmic stuff, drum machines, samples, like, and I was like, oh man, who's like rehearsing in the living room right now? And I went out, and it was this one dude who had a OP1, Teenage Engineering OP1, and he just really knew how to use it well. Yeah. And the OP1 has like a tape recorder where you can just multi-track and record to the tape, and he had like recorded all that stuff himself on the tape, and he was just playing it through a PA. I was like, wow, I want one of those things. And like the screen is amazing, and there's like he was showing it to me, and there was like a cow on the interface, and it's like a multicolored like neon cow. Yeah. And he's like turning knobs. It just sounded so crazy.
That's so cool.
I was like, cool, I want the cow video game music making device. And I got that. I found one on Craigslist in Austin. I just started messing with it all the time. And I didn't have any other gear. You know, it's not like I had a bunch of synths and a guitar and this and that. Like I literally just like played drums and my keyboard. Yeah. And then I got this OP1, and I was like, well, I got to learn this thing. Yeah. And just through the process of learning how to use that and the many different ways it can be used, it opened me up to a lot of music that I had been sleeping on, you know, like Brian Eno and some of this like ambient synthesizer music that I just wasn't aware of its existence. I had never sat down and checked it out. And so I started listening to some of that stuff and trying to like create a similar feeling with what I had, which was like an OP1. And then the whole beat making thing, you know, it was like, it was just really popular. And I enjoy listening to that stuff. You know, there's all those YouTube channels that sometimes get a bad rap of like the girl with the headphones. Right. And she's like writing in the book. And it's just that, you know, and a lot of the material sounds similar. It's like jazz samples with like a Jay Dilla kind of hip hop beat to it. Yeah, right. And it's easy to just like generalize all that and be like, oh, they're just stealing from jazz musicians, and that's not actually like real music. But I thought, well, this is fun, and I play jazz. I know guys that play jazz, and I can make some stuff like this. And so, Sean Giddings actually helped me with that beat tape, and he recorded a bunch of little 8-bar loops that sounded exactly like, you know, Robert Glasper, and just this really cool voicings and Rhodes and piano stuff.
Sean's so good, man.
Oh, he's awesome. And so that made it really easy for me and really fun for me to like, now I'm not stealing, right? I'm not just like taking a Bill Evans tune and flipping it and chopping it up. I'm taking like, you know, my buddy Sean and like putting that in the OP1 and adding samples and beats and stuff to that. And I just, it's fun. And I would like post it online. Yeah. And what I would realize is I'd post a video of me playing jazz or playing with brushes or something, you know, trying to like swing out, and it would get like a couple hundred views, and my friends would like it. And then I'd post like a lo-fi hip hop thing, and it would get like thousands of views, and you know, I'd get more followers. And I was like, oh, well, that stuff resonates with people. Yeah. It's popular. Right. And I like it, and it's cool, you know? Yeah. So I was like, I'm just going to make that stuff and not worry too much about it.
I think, I mean, definitely me, like just checking out all the different stuff that you do last night and in the past couple of days, and then talking about it now with you, and I think people will probably like feel the same way, is that it's like so freeing for the people who want to focus on other projects, but they feel like it might like, the court of public opinion within their certain discipline might view it as a bastardization, or this kind of like, you're going off and doing a fringe thing that doesn't have quite as much, you know.
Yeah. What about the bebop, bro?
Yeah, exactly, right. And of course, there's like nothing wrong with that, and we all want to play that, but like, like, I've mentioned it before in the past couple of weeks, but like I just put on a new big band like here in the space. It was crazy. We fit 19 people
awesome.
in here.
I watched from home. That was super cool.
Oh man, thank you so much for checking it out.
But I guess all the good players were booked that night.
They were all,
you just
man, yeah.
had a bunch of subs playing.
It was all Butch Miles students.
Yeah.
No. But that band was something that I've wanted to do for years. But I just felt like, if I take, something I love, one of my favorite musicians of all time, the tallest man on earth. I don't know if you listen to much of his stuff, but like, it's like if I take one of his tunes and put it in here, people are gonna think it's like, well, what are you doing? Like trying to mix like all this different stuff, and I just felt this crushing weight of like, don't stray too far, but then that's one of the main reasons why, and this is the part of the show where everybody takes a shot, because it's an ongoing joke that everybody takes a shot every time I mention Kurt Elling, but like that's why I gravitated towards Kurt Elling, was because he was, right, there we go, and there, because he, in any given record, he'll be doing, like a Joe Jackson tune, or like a U2 tune, or like German Leader, or, like insert, whatever here. And that is very, very freeing, and also allows you to not burn out. Like what you were saying, I was just kind of like, yes, like the whole thing of going to the gig and then finishing. And there are amazing things that happen that night, but the whole thing, you might have gotten like caught up in your head. Like I know I do this all the time, and I think, I was shitty on the second tune, so the rest of everything that I'm going to do tonight is shitty. Like I'm going to like give my best, but like, the amount of times whenever I was like really like in the thick of trying to learn how to scat of something of value, like improvise something of value, and just be like, everything sucks, and then it's like gambling where you're like, okay, well then I'm going to take one on the next tune to like make up for what I did wrong there, but then you're doing it for the wrong reasons and you're not being present, so then the next solo sucks, and you've become in this, exactly right, and then you leave and you have $0 in your wallet, but that whole thing. So, but watching all the things that you make is super freeing, and just listening to you play piano, like we were getting ready here, we were setting up the cameras, and hearing you sit down, I was like, man, it's the most beautiful thing. Like I wish like I could just like sit here and listen to you play for hours. Man. Like it really just sounds incredible. Another thing that I really liked was, as we've been kind of mentioning over the course of this morning, is using spoken word, and the thing that Colin had recorded on the what is the track, Imagination. I'm so curious, especially for like instrumentalists, when they do want to include something with text, whether it's singing or spoken word, how do you pick the and how does it come to you? The either vocal, singing samples, or the like, because I mean words are everything, right? Like once you attach words to something, it is a very clear narrative.
Yeah, you've got a story then.
Exactly, and it can still be left open to interpretation, like a piece of art that's hanging on a wall, but there's decidedly more direction of what that interpretation is going to mean. So how do you pick those spoken word sections?
Yeah. So that project, that like lo-fi beat tape, it's done, and it's been done for a while, and I haven't released it because I'm I'm scared about copyright stuff. With that, specifically the spoken word stuff, specifically Alan Watts. Alan Watts is no longer with us, but his like estate is managed by his family. Sure. And there's a million videos out there of Alan Watts quotes, and people have put music under it and stuff like that. But if you're gonna if you're gonna make money on it, if you're gonna sell it, you got to clear all your samples. And the people feel differently about that, and some people are like, oh, just pitch it down and no one will know that you used it. But I want to like be legit about it. So I had actually sent emails to Alan Watts' estate, and I sent them my music. It's like, hey, I'm another guy who's sampling Alan Watts. Sure. Here's my stuff, but let me know licensing and what do I pay you and stuff. And I didn't hear back, and I tried again, and I didn't hear back. And so I was like, okay, well, that's on hold, because I really want to use his stuff, because it adds a lot. Without it, it's instrumental hip hop, and that's fine. But I felt like adding that stuff meant a lot, and it meant a lot to me. Yeah. How do you choose what to use? Well, there's a bass player in San Antonio named Jim Calson, electric bass player, amazing bass player, but also like really studied in martial arts and meditation, and I was like going through some shit, man. My parents were getting divorced after 32 years of marriage, and it was very, very hard for me to stay present and to stay in the moment on my gigs with people, in my conversations, in real life. I was just like living upstairs in my head. It was really, challenging. But I had never considered mindfulness, presence, just being in the moment, in music, sure. Playing jazz, yes, but like brushing your teeth. Are you just like also in the moment, while you're brushing your teeth or doing the dishes or, whatever, or are you like thinking about all the things you wish you could say to whatever person, and it's not healthy. So Jim, he like hipped me to all these books, authors, philosophers.
Hit me.
J. Krishnamurti.
Okay.
It's just like J. Krishnamurti. He's got a book called Think on These Things, which is just like a Bible of really valuable information. The Four Agreements is another one. And he also hit me to this guy, Neville Goddard.
Okay.
And Neville...
I know that name.
He's the sample on that track, Imagination. He's the guy who's speaking about using your imagination to like manifest the real world around you.
Yeah.
And he has a book called The Power of Awareness. And it's all about, it's like The Secret. It's like whatever you want in your life is totally attainable, but you have to have enough imagination to see it, to feel it, not to imagine what it would be like someday, but to imagine what it feels like now that you're already there. You've already done it, stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, And
by the way, you are in, people who have watched the show are probably like, oh God, this is the last thing Christian needs to hear, because like I talk about this all the time on the show. You were in the safest place. We are entirely.
It's valuable stuff, man. No matter what is going on in your life, it's valuable to hear people talk about concepts like this and at least be aware of them. At least be aware that there's other ways to think about things or to not think about things. And so, I was like making a lot of this music and listening to a lot of this stuff just to help me out personally. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sample that into the OP1 and put it on this track. And the cool thing about doing that is you're limited by the OP1 to like 12 seconds, right? So I have to like find snapshots of like just a phrase that means a lot to me or something, and I'll grab it. And then it's cool is you can chop it up and you can put different words on different keys. So then you're in charge of the actual delivery and the phrasing, Start by watching all your thoughts very carefully, very closely, and then you can play it like a freaking DJ, and you can be rhythmic with it and start by like we just play it like an instrument. And that was like a lot of fun for me, because it's like, look, they said this amazing stuff, and sometimes you just play the whole clip, and it is what it is. But to actually like DJ it a little bit and be able to put it right on the downbeat or something like that, because you're playing a key, if anything, it was just fun for me to like have a tactile way to like play speech, words and phrases and stuff like that.
It's this very kind of overarching, like, viewpoint. I don't want to misspeak and say it's this like deity type position, because then it starts to inflate people's heads. God. It's like, right. But that is like super cool to be able, because I mean, like, what do we want in life other than control? Not control over people, but just like control over our own lives, being able to not be controlled by other things, right? So that's like a really nice way to be able to kind of have a concentrated dose of that, but also, balancing that with the kind of source material that you're talking about, of like being present and knowing, I might be going down a little rabbit hole of philosophical whatever right now, but the whole idea of like balancing when you're given power, when you're given control, knowing how to pair that with discernment of how to stay at a center and stay meditative and stay present and not, just discernment of how to make things, which I think is just also musicians in general. Like we have to have the discernment of, ultimately it's our thing. We get to make whatever we want to make, but how do we balance it for a myriad of different influences, reasons, considerations, etc. I'll end that little rant rabbit hole. But
well, it's I mean, it like making that stuff was like a meditation practice for me, because it required me to be fully in the moment.
Yeah.
Grabbing these recordings, recording drum beats, recording this, and even just the OP1, like I keep talking about it, why it means so much to me, because I do play the piano and I play the guitar, and you know, it's like when I was just playing jazz gigs, I was like only playing the drums. And it's like if somebody thought of me as a musician, they thought of me as a drummer that played jazz.
Sure.
But doing this other stuff has allowed me to really kind of explore all the corners of my own music, whether it's harmony or melody or sampling and stuff like that, which I just wasn't doing before, you know? So I felt like it was just helping me grow. And then to make it better, I was like incorporating, you know, this cool spoken word and stuff like that.
I was going to ask how that influences all the things, because I mean, obviously you're still playing like 250 plus nights a year, you know, Jazz Texas consistently, and like whatever other, you know, things that you're playing in. So I was going to ask how this newfound like love with OP1 and all of that kind of palette of colors to use, how that comes back to your original thing of just playing behind the kit on regular gigs.
Yeah, I've struggled with it, because again, it's that voice that's like, what does everyone else think, you know? And it's like, well, maybe I should be shedding more drums, and maybe I should really be working on playing up tempo and you know, soloing over the bar line and 7 and you know, there's always something to work on in jazz. It never stops, but there's only so much time in the day.
Right.
You know, so what do you do? Do you do one thing super, super well, better than anyone else? Or do you try to do a lot of stuff and hope that it all informs each other?
Yeah.
You know, and so for me, I was like, I finally realized like, man, my jazz stuff isn't going away.
Yeah.
It's not really like getting worse. If anything, I'm getting more comfortable and more confident because of the volume of gigs that I'm playing.
Right.
Even if I'm not shedding all the time. I remember when I started taking lessons with Butch, I went and met with him in his office to say, how much did you used to practice? Because I didn't know. And I was like, I'm 21. I want to be a jazz drummer, but I'm starting to feel like I need to like end my social life as a whole and just practice for many hours. And that did happen when I was at Texas State. When I was 21, I like did that for a year or two where I just like was practicing all the time.
Yeah.
But when I asked Butch about it, hoping that he would have some answer, 6 hours a day, no more, no less, you know?
Sure.
Which obviously there's no right or wrong answer. But he told me, he was like, I wasn't really practicing when I was your age, when I was coming up. I was playing gigs every night. He was like, I would play a 4-hour gig 6 nights a week with the Iris Bell Trio. We had a residency for 8 years. He was like, that was my practice. Yeah. You know, every night I would take a 32-bar drum solo or a 64-bar drum solo, and we would trade 8s and trade 4s. And he was like, that was my practice, even though it was a gig. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, you know, granted, if you really want to work on over the bar line phrasing and 7/8, you're going to need to like go in the practice room and spend some time with that. But I've kind of had that mentality of like, I play a lot of gigs each week. Not to, you know, toot my own horn or whatever. No, it's just like
a reality.
I maintain a busy enough schedule playing gigs that I don't anymore try to beat myself up about like, why aren't you also like practicing when you're not playing those gigs? It's like I feel comfortable playing with synthesizers and playing music that doesn't even have drums in it, you know, ambient synth music and stuff like that. Because it helps me recharge. Yeah. And it's like, that's my meditation away from the high octane jazz gig and go do something different, play another gig the next day. Yeah. Go back to the studio. And, you know, it just, for me personally, I've enjoyed the more different stuff that I can do. Yeah. It makes me appreciate all the other stuff more. Yeah. Versus if I'm only doing that one thing all the time, eventually you get burned out in some form or fashion. Eventually it starts to lose the sparkle and it really feels like work. And, you know, that we all deal with that at some point if we're fortunate enough to be playing a lot. So for me, it's just helped reset that to have other mediums and other instruments and stuff to draw from.
Man, that is beautiful. That's so affirming too of just like other, affirming of ideas of how to diversify and do other things that like, satisfy other creative draws personally, but also it like puts to bed a lot of the fears of like, are people going to think I'm a fraud because I go off and do this other thing that's like a different thing? Yeah.
Oh
that's
man,
really nice.
I started making tutorials for the OP1, and that's when I really had like an identity crisis of like, what am I doing? What if all the my Austin jazz friends are like seeing me like, hey YouTube, what's going on? So here's how you do it, but right. You really just have to silence that voice. And who helped me realize that was Brent Doc. He really was like, man, like with opening his club and all the work he's doing, he's like, there's not enough time to care about what other people think. And the sooner you can quiet that voice, the sooner your album's going to come out, and the sooner your projects are going to be done, the sooner you're going to be doing what you need to do. Yeah. Because if you're always worried about, is so-and-so going to think it's hip enough, you're just going to be paralyzed all the time, So, just can't worry. Got to make those YouTube videos, make those tutorials, and just feel awkward doing it,
What's up, YouTube? Welcome to Off the Bandstand.
What's going on?
Our sponsor today is OP1. Right. It drops down. There's a spotlight on it. Man, well, the final two questions I always ask is, the first one is if there is a record that you could suggest to people. It could be jazz, it could be lo-fi, it could be ambient music, it could be anything that you would suggest people go at least listen to one track immediately following this episode. What would you say to go check out?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Yeah. It changes.
Could be a few.
It changes so often. I find myself gravitating a lot towards like Anderson .Paak and Flying Lotus and Kendrick Lamar, and then like jazz, all kinds of stuff. But something that's kind of always in my rotation that I feel like he's a musician that a lot of people don't know about yet, is this guy Ethan Gruska. Okay. And Ethan is a super talented musician out of Los Angeles, and he's got a very talented musical family. His grandfather is John Williams, and he's like, he breathes music, you know, and he has an album out called Slow Motionary. That he put out a few years back. And he has another album called On Guard that came out even more recently. But that album, specifically Slow Motionary, is just so beautiful. And the first song on it is called The Valley. And it's, I just keep going back to it. It's so beautiful. It almost feels through composed at times. It's just piano and voice. And it's not really like a solid meter or tempo, but just beautiful songwriting, beautiful singing, and really understated, soft, beautiful piano playing. And I keep going back there. And when people are like, what are you listening to? What should I hear? I kind of assume a lot of people like haven't heard this guy yet. And so I tell them to go that way. So.
That sounds so immediately exactly what I want to listen to, so I will listen to it in the car.
Ethan Gruska, Gruska. Okay. Ethan Gruska.
And his grandfather is John Williams.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I think he's got an uncle that like plays in like Toto and like it. I don't know. I think his whole family is like a very musical family. But he's awesome. He's a super nice guy. I actually met him through Instagram and through the OP1. He's also an OP1 guy, and so we've hung out a couple times, and I'm just blown away by his musicianship. And he seems to be really like not afraid to try new stuff. Which is cool because there's a lot of new stuff coming out right now. So
cool, man. Well, the final question is, we all have gigs from hell where things go totally sideways. So if you can think of a specific instance where you were like, what the hell is going on? What is your gig from hell?
Yeah. I won't name anybody, but I'll explain the situation. So there was a gig that I was playing, and it was like a conference. Like it was like a booze conference.
Got it.
So everybody's getting just smashed. And I had played another gig before then, and we had to like move. We had like 10 minutes to like load everything up and get to another location and set up and play. And the instrumentation was drums, upright bass, and a horn.
Okay.
Which is already kind of difficult, you know, like you don't have the chords. It can be really, really cool and adventurous, but it can also be a bit of a challenge depending on the situation. But we're playing this gig and there's so many people and it's so loud and it's just like not the environment for a trio. And we started playing and there's just so much going on. And eventually the horn player just kind of wanders off and he's like, he's kind of gone. And so I'm playing there with this upright bass player, and you know it was like, let's play whatever tune as a funk because this is like a party, and you know, and so and then he's gone, and I'm just sitting there playing, looking at this bass player, and he's kind of looking at me, just like shaking his head, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking around the room, and everyone's just wasted.
Oh my god!
And I'm wearing a suit and tie,
you
know, and I was just kind of like, what? Why am I here? Why are we? They should just have a freaking iPad playing music, club music, and I should be home right now, probably sleeping. But I just remember that as being one of the weirder experiences that I had found myself in.
Did the horn player come back?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. You know, he was like still playing, I think, and he just like was walking around the room, and then someone was like talking to him, and they're like, "Hey, come over here and let me show you." You know, and eventually he was just kind of off in his own place, but I just remember playing time. You know, it's like there's not even someone playing chords, like literally just a bass line and a drum groove, and it went on for far too long. We're on like, you know, minute 6 or 7 of just playing through the form over and over and over again. I was like, oh, somebody's got to just throw in the towel. We got to get out of here.
You should have just like had the OP1 right there, like recorded what you guys were playing,
sample it,
and then walk away. Go get all boozy with everybody else.
Yeah. That was a weird one. I mean, it wasn't like a horrible experience, but I just hit that point where I was like, this is weird.
Were you talking about those gigs where you're like, I just didn't have any fun, like whatever? It's like, this is one of those warranted, like, what are we doing? Yeah. What are we doing right now? Like, this is ridiculous.
There was one other one. I won't get too far into it, but it was recent, and I played this gig, and it was billed as like a piano trio thing, and it's a private party, and we're playing original music, and I was like, awesome. And it's all these like classical music people putting it on, but the way they had it set up, it was a house party. They had an upright piano inside the house that they wouldn't move outside, but they wanted the piano player to play that. And they wanted the upright bass and the drums outside on the porch.
Come on.
And so the piano player's inside the house playing an upright with the lid facing away from me, you know, with the door.
Yeah.
And I'm outside playing my drums with people right next to me. And I'm trying to play so quiet so that I can hear so I can hear, you know, be a part of what's happening. And it was a whole set of music played like that. And I was just like, again, what are we doing here?
Yeah,
like, either we all go inside or we bring the piano out or he has a keyboard, but this like half the band inside, half the band outside. That's out. That's pretty weird.
It's a good I don't know, social experiment. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that. Well, man, your website is BrandonGuerraDrums.com? BrandonGuerra.com?
I think my website is BrandonGuerraMusic.com.
Okay.
But all my social media handle on Instagram is Brandon Guerra Drums.
Okay, perfect. And people can go check out all of like the sampling on YouTube and Instagram of the OP1 stuff. People can keep an eye out. Do you have a Bandcamp for that stuff, or will it be on Bandcamp?
Not yet. It will be though.
Okay.
Yeah, my plan is to release a bunch of stuff in the not too far future. Some of it under my own name, a couple of different projects, and then this album that I'm collaborating on with a friend.
Gotcha. Well, I'm sure you'll post it all on Instagram and
It'll be
plug
out
it all there so everybody can go find it. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Brandon, man, what a pleasure to sit down with you,
thanks,
brother.
Christian.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Super fun hanging out, dude.